The Spin-off Podcast Network. Skinny are helping you show how smart you are with the 1Q quiz, an all-new, super challenging and super quick daily quiz built by the Spin-off. Every Monday, Skinny are giving you the chance to prove you're smart with the Skinny Extra Credit question. Get it right, and you'll get the chance to score yourself some Skinny Extra mobile credit, so you can text, call, or even video call your group chat and gloat about how big your brain is. T's and C's apply.
The Fold is brought to you by O-Media, making brands unmissable and public spaces better across Aotearoa.
No mai hoki mai kia The Fold e mihi nei ko Dangri tōku ingoa. My guest this week is Ahmed Osman, who, I'm going to be honest, I had not heard of this time last week. And I got an email over the weekend from Ahmed, and quite long and very, very well written and compelling, talking about, you know, we live in an era where diversity and representation are considered and discussed a lot, and, you know, there are particular, you know, where we're sort of realizing, you know, we being the sort of the very Pākehā-dominated media are realizing that there are more stories than ours to be told, and that is sort of going out in layers, and you know, sort of Māori stories and Pacific stories have become much more prioritized. Still not enough, still nowhere near done as if it'll ever be done, but there's been an emphasis there. Just this morning, New Zealand On Air sent out a press release talking about Pan-Asian stories and the historic underrepresentation of those communities on our screens. And what Ahmed was saying, so Ahmed is a Somali New Zealander. He came here when he was 12. He's now 35. He's been obsessed with film his whole life, and you'll hear him speak very affectingly about that on this podcast. But he, aside from Brotown, you know, that absolute gem, shining light that was Brotown, he said he's never seen anyone who sort of looked like him on our screens. And what we do, I think, is get into some really, really interesting spaces where, you know, very frequently I think that we think about representation, or commissioners think about representation, and we must have a certain quantum of content from a particular community to serve that particular community, and it should be roughly proportional to that community's size, which is just such a reductive way of thinking about this stuff, because it implies that the only stories that we're interested in are ones that are basically about our own lives. And the whole recent history of television all over the world is that the shows that have really impacted have been about wholly different communities, and it's that transportational opportunity that exists with our stories. But more than that, what happens when you're one of the people who sits in the 1%, you know, the sort of African Muslim community? According to community size, you might never get funded. And we talk about that, and we talk about the flow and consequences of that. And what I love about the conversation is that Ahmed, who clearly he's been working at this for over a decade, he's not, I mean, I'm sure at times he is angry, he has every right to be, but this is very much a conversation that comes from a place of, here is what we're missing, and here is the opportunity. And so I think it gets into some really interesting stuff. If you want to see his work, he has a show on Re called Third Culture Minds, which he made on a tiny shoestring budget, and is one of the best and most popular things that they've done. He's just founded a new production company called Homegrown with Ahmed Osman, and you know, this is a person who's in his prime, and you know, has some fantastic ideas, and I really hope that this conversation leads to more opportunities for him and people like him. Just before we start, I want to thank Vodafone for making the Fold possible. A conversation like this feels like it really matters, and so I just really, really appreciate that Vodafone funds the Fold and has made that decision to make a conversation like this possible. They provide the world-class network infrastructure that underpins the spin-off, and we rely on it every day, and I suggest that you do the same. This is Ahmed Osman on The Fold. Tinakwe, Ahmed, and welcome to The Fold.
Thanks very much for having me, Duncan. I'm a big fan of the podcast, and I really appreciate you having me on.
Oh no, I really appreciate you joining me, and as I said before, the email that you sent was one of the best and most considered and thought provoking that I've had since starting the podcast, if I'm honest. And as regular listeners will know, normally I'd like to kind of get right into the topic, but I think that with this one, without knowing more about you and your story and your journey to this moment, so do you mind kind of explaining for our listeners, a bit about yourself and your background?
Yes, absolutely. My name is Ahmed Osman. I'm a filmmaker, originally from Somalia. I grew up in Wellington. I came to New Zealand when I was about 12, so born in Somalia. We fled around the early 90s, around 91, when I was 4, because of the civil war that broke out there. Spent several years of my childhood in Kenya, and was fortunate enough to come over here under the refugee status when I was 12. Went through Mangere resettlement centre, and then we got resettled in Wellington, grew up there, and so been here a little over 20-somewhat years. What am I now? 35? So, quite a long time.
And tell me how you got interested in film and television and why you're so passionate about it.
It's actually quite funny because growing up, film and generally television has always been part of my life. And Somalis, we're quite a oral storytellers. We're quite poetic people in essence. But how I got into it was, when I was quite young, my mum used to get these bootlegged DVDs and videos of Bollywood films. And within the Somali community, we're quite big fans of Indian films and Bollywood films in general. And we used to get these DVDs of Bollywood films that were translated into Somali. And every Friday, man, we used to just kind of like bunker down, watch, and these videos will make its way around the communities, and we'll just continue to pass on to one another. And I just recall watching so many Bollywood films as a kid, and just seeing how in one moment these movies will have like action sequences, and they will have, fight scenes. And then the next minute, it's just all sort of like dance and song and music and happy, and then go back to dramatics and everything like that. And from when I was 6 years old, it's just sort of like what I wanted to do. And this just sort of took me away from my environment and where we were, and transported me, because they're just such captivating and happy films, but it's got everything you want in a film: action, drama, music, all of that. And I loved it. And, I knew that that's kind of like what I wanted to do.
So the email that you sent me contains this line, which honestly I've heard variations of from multiple people from different kind of communities within New Zealand over the years. And it basically says, "I've never seen anyone who looks like me on our screens." And you acknowledge in the email that you're African, you're Muslim, that these communities are sort of roughly 1% of or that community is roughly 1% of our population. But just hearing you tell your story, then you can kind of sense that in terms of stories that we should think about and that would help broaden our conception of what a New Zealander is, that it's incredibly important that we recognise those. How does that sort of lack of representation in our media, on our screens, manifest and impact the communities that you feel a relationship with?
In a lot of ways, really. I strongly believe that if you can see yourself reflected on television or in any capacity, whether that is on print media or in commercials or in TV shows or anything like that, you can aspire to be. So for me, growing up, I didn't really see anyone that looked like me on television. I didn't really see anyone that looked like me in newsrooms. I didn't really see anyone that looked like me, or anybody who wore a headscarf or anything like that. And that has a huge impact on how we see ourselves, the kind of stories that I told about us, but also the kind of stories that we want to tell. And I think it's really, really important, because the fact is, we've been in New Zealand well over 30 years, and our stories are quite unique. We've got such authentic stories, which I think will add to New Zealand's screen industry, but it's not something that's sort of taken into account. Yes, we're such a small population, but being from Africa, I love Bollywood films and I related to those. And so for me, that says everything. We can watch content and we can find something that we can just sort of like take interest in. But, that's the only thing, is that, just growing up, there was no one that looked like me. And that does have an impact in the way that you see yourself. So, yeah, it does have quite a huge impact on our communities.
And so since training to work in this industry, do you want to describe the way that you've interacted with it? I think there was certainly a frustration I sensed, or that you articulated in the email, about the roles and the opportunities that you've had, the gap between those and what you aspire to do and to be.
Absolutely. I think, I finished film school, I think it's over 11 years ago now. Most of the roles that I've been in have been running jobs or clerking jobs or production assistants or those sorts of roles. Starting out, I always I did a bit of theatre. I wanted to act. So I think a great article that I read was Kelvin's article, and that just sort of explained, I think that I related to that so much because that was my experience. And it was a big part of the reason why I didn't want to be in front of the camera anymore. Just because of the opportunities that were coming, that I was getting offered, were those of like being the extra, or like, being in King Kong and being on the island skull scenes and all of those sorts of things. Or, those really, I think Kelvin summarized it in a really great way. And so it was a big part of the reason why I decided to go behind the camera, because I wanted to tell stories that were authentic, that were unique. And to be able to get those opportunities meant that obviously you've got to gain the experience to tell those stories. And for me, I felt for a really long time I've tried to do that. But, when you continue to work on things and you just keep getting the same sort of roles which don't give you the opportunity to grow or learn, it just really made me feel disheartened and made me fall in love with the industry that I loved growing up, wanting to be part of. So, and it was a big part of the reason why I just decided to just not take jobs like that anymore and go out and try and do my own things, and try and tell stories that meant something to me, even if that meant, finding it really, really challenging to be able to get those projects funded or to be able to get these projects made in any capacity. I just decided that this is what I wanted to do. I'm going to go out and try and do it.
So I want to talk about that sort of funding, commissioning, production houses, that piece shortly. But before then, I want to look at some of the work that you have been able to make. Most notably this a series for Re. About sort of migrant and kind of resettled stories in some respects. Do you want to tell me about that work and what it was like to work on something which is much closer to probably the closest thing to something which recognises what you've been describing so far?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think those are sort of the authentic stories that I'm talking about. Is that a lot of that doesn't get highlighted within our communities. Being able to make third culture minds meant that it wasn't without its challenges. We pitched this project to multiple platforms and we were told that there was no audience for it and that, there weren't a lot of people that were going to watch this. But
does that feel when you get that kind of feedback? You're essentially being told stories which are, on some level, that's your story, just aren't interesting. That must be heartbreaking.
Absolutely. And I think it is. It's very disheartening. I think it's you work so hard to try and to fit in, to be part of, to try and have the opportunity to tell your own stories, but to show that there is authenticity in those stories that you're trying to tell. In fact, try and diversify from the same sort of things that we've been seeing on our screens for a really long time, and share stories that are unique to a group of community or a group of people that have not been seen before, that have not been told from the perspective that we're trying to tell it from. So absolutely, it was without a doubt disheartening, but it didn't make us, stop or, just sort of like second guess ourselves. We continue to push on with that to try and make it. Fortunate enough to work with the team at RE, Francis and Anna, who have been incredible. But we made that project for the bare minimums from the Mental Health Foundation. And I flew over to the other side of the world to be able to conduct an interview for that. So that in itself says something. So yeah, those are the sort of challenges that I kind of refer to, is that it's not the first time that you get told, like, okay, yep, there's no platform for this, or there's no audience for this, and who's going to watch it, or who's going to be able to relate to this sort of content. We saw that Third Culture Minds is probably one of RE's most successful features that they've done. It's won an award here and in Australia as well for journalism award for mental health, and it shared experiences that are very, very close to us. So that is the sort of challenges that I was talking about.
For sure. We'll take a very quick break now and return with more from Ahmed shortly.
The Fold is brought to you by O Media, making brands unmissable and public spaces better across Aotearoa, with over 4,000 out-of-home advertising sites nationwide across both street furniture and retail centres. I'm super grateful to O Media for enabling us to make unmissable connections with Kiwis.
Raising capital or taking your business to the world? Investment Fix has the lowdown on everything you need to make it happen. This season, we're exploring the US market, the opportunities it offers, what it takes to grow a business there, and the best way to approach investors. Join some of the superstars of the investment and business world as they share advice from their time in the US so you can make your mahi count in this massive market. The Investment Fix podcast, brought to you by Invest New Zealand. Tune in today.
We're back now with Ahmed Osman, who was just describing his Third Culture Minds, his brilliant kind of documentary series for RE. I want to talk now a bit about how we sort of solve for this, because the issues you describe of sort of butting up against a gatekeeper that basically, tells you that your story or what it is you want to do, there just isn't an audience for it. And it feels like there can be, the New Zealand media and television industry has belatedly discovered that it should be a more diverse place. And, there's been a variety of different pressures that have brought that about. But it seems to be, it's trying to solve, in inverted commas, that very quickly, and it seems to consider that, okay, well, in addition to the sort of dominant Pākehā narratives, we'll add Māori and Pacific stories, but it doesn't really go a long way beyond that. In fact, just this morning there was a New Zealand On Air press release highlighting the lack of Pan-Asian representation in New Zealand, and I'm sure that you've had conversations with people from that community about their own struggles there. Where do you sort of, in your over, what is more than a decade now, sort of pressing on that, where do you feel like the issue lies? Because you have this joined up thing. Some of our listeners won't necessarily know about this, but to get something made in New Zealand, someone has to pay for it. Mostly that's New Zealand On Air. New Zealand On Air doesn't really directly fund things. It tends to have a platform like in between, and then often it's made by a production house, and you kind of need 3 yeses to get that made. Do you have a sense of where the issue lies from your perspective?
I think it's across the board. You have to look at the funders. You have to look at the commissioners. You have to look at the production houses. And you have to ask the question, are there people in those spaces that look like us, that are willing to tell an authentic story, a different story? I love what the Pan Asian Collective is doing. I love Suchi and Roseanne and those guys. And I will go back to in the last year, if you look at what's been on television, what has been the most, standout programs or TV shows that we've seen? Creamery. And I think, if you look at the team behind that, it's unique, it's diverse, and it's people being, given the opportunity to try and tell something that's different. Panthers is another thing. It's quite historical, but great. I think the funders are doing everything they can to be inclusive and try and give opportunities and, platforms to Indigenous storytellers, to Pacifica, and now to Pan-Asian communities. But I think if you look at NZ On Air's, funding schedules and deadlines, it says on the targeted rounds, communities of Pacific, Asian, Indian, and other reasonable sized communities. There's nothing in there about Muslims. There's nothing in there about Africans. Yes, we do make up about 1% of the population, but I guarantee you, as I said, Duncan, that our stories would would enrich the screen, our screens, whether that is in newsroom capacity, whether that's in, TV shows, commercials, or so forth. Muslims make up over 1 billion people around the planet. And, to not have one single person to be on a TV show or to be on a commercial or to be on anything in this country is really, really dire. And, we've seen recent research conducted that representation matters. That if you see yourself on screen, you can aspire to be. And I truly believe that, And for me, I would go back to my own experiences, that if I had seen people that look like me in front and behind the camera, it would be so much easier for me to aspire to be a director, to produce, and to be able to make the content that would add to our industry.
And when we make content, we shouldn't, I think it's sort of somewhat reductive to say that if a community makes content, it's making it purely for its own community. Obviously, it has great flow-on effects there, but it's also, when done well, it can reach a mass audience and it can change that audience. And I think, we've seen with the horrific attacks in Christchurch, and it's always dangerous to kind of extrapolate from the actions of an individual something broader about the culture. But on some level, he was created by a hateful culture. And, there is a sense that our tolerance and our sort of shared understanding can be improved by the communication of our stories in a variety of ways. You also pointed out in your email, They Are Us, the seemingly, thankfully, stillborn film project that was going on, was about, but not of, that community. Do you want to talk about that episode? To understand if it's too raw, and about how it felt for that to be the first sort of big project that sort of seems to have been about the Muslim community, and how that felt for you as someone who's been in it, pushing for so long. Absolutely.
And just to go back to that point you made just before that, is that you said that sometimes the narrative of Islam and Muslims globally has been atrocious, I would say. On as far as representation goes, the characters that you see of Muslim people and of the religion of Islam has always been that of the terrorist, and a narrative that's been created. And that's something that, I think added to what we saw happen, because I do believe that media plays a really strong role in the way that people think. And globally, we're in a situation now where everything that we see influences us. everything that we see has an impact on us, the way that we live. And we consume so much content. So when there's a narrative that's created, that's definitely going to add to how certain people feel about one's religion, one's gender orientation, or anything, right? And so had there been a better representation of the Islamic faith and Muslims in general, we wouldn't be in the spaces that we are at the moment. And, going on to that point of like, they are us, our community was impacted by what happened on March 15th. Like literally every single person that is Muslim in New Zealand was impacted because they knew someone who was impacted by what happened. And I think to try and tell a story about that, to take that narrative away from those that have experienced this atrocious, heinous act, just showed the lack of understanding, the lack of empathy, and I think the lack of originality when it comes to storytelling, Yes, we'll get to a point where we might see stories about what happened March 15th. And yes, there will come a point when people will start talking about that sort of stuff. But who do we want telling those stories? That's really the most important question that we should have just first asked. And, I think it's we need to get there. We need to be able to see Muslim filmmakers. We need to be able to see, Muslims on our screen. We need to be able to see Muslims strive. We need to be able to see Muslims fall in love. We need to be able to see people with hijabs on our screen so that when they're out and about, they're not being abused. And I think that's what representation in front and behind the camera is so important.
Kia ora. I mean, hearing you talk, it's unfortunate that to this point we've had to dwell on the struggle, which has been really, it sounds like largely your experience. But what I'd love to do now is sort of pivot it towards what you'd love to do if given the opportunity. Essentially, like I know that we've got some people who listen who are in these roles who think and care and actually can make changes that might improve this environment. What are some of the is there a particular project? I don't want to put you on the spot, but something that you would love to do. Most of us have got a drawer full of them, right? That is just waiting for the opportunity.
I have to say that I'm in a privileged position where we are making content. We do have stuff in development. I think that...
Who's we in this context? Sorry to interrupt.
We recently just started a production company, Homegrown, and our aim is to produce content, that would further the Muslim experience here in Aotearoa. And we're working on some things, hopefully, that we'll see on our screens at some point. But what I would love to see is the commissioners really, whether that's in NZ On Air, whether that's, the Film Commission, whether that's at the networks, production houses, agencies, really consciously look at what they're doing in terms of their day-to-day roles and the positions of influence that they're in, and really ask themselves what it would do for us as a whole, as an industry, to have a more inclusive industry. I would love to see Afro Kiwis be able to tell their own stories. I think in music we're seeing that so much because if you look at the artists that are currently around in TV, in commercials, you're creating an engagement. You're almost gaining a new audience, that have been neglected by mainstream media. But I also think that, those things matter. We need to be able to see ourselves reflected so that we can, our next generation can strive to be. So I would say it's a collective issue that whether it's, as I said, whether it's, the funders, the commissioners, networks, agencies, and so forth.
Yeah, that's basically where it is, right? Like, I think it's something that we all need to think about. And I admire you so much for the way that you've articulated that. And I hope that our listeners are listening and have been provoked by it. Thank you so much for coming on the fold today, Ahmed. I really appreciate your time and wish you all the best with Homegrown and with hopefully affecting change in the opportunities for Afro-Kiwis and for Muslims in all the facets of our industry here.
Thank you so much, Duncan. I really appreciate you having me on.
That was The Fold, brought to you by our partners at O Media, making brands unmissable and public spaces better across Aotearoa. Huge thanks to O Media for sponsoring this episode of The Fold and enabling us to make unmissable connections with Kiwis.
Ready to rediscover the joys of cycling? With over 300 kilometres of cycle paths across Tāmaki Makaurau, jumping on your bike and going for a ride is such a fun way to discover the city from a different perspective. Cycling is getting more and more popular across Auckland, so now's a great time to join the hype and give cycling a go. Head to at.govt/cycling to find your nearest cycleway today. The Spin-off Podcast Network.